The room presents itself as a neutral container, offering no immediate suggestion of purpose or outcome. Light behaves in a way that supports the assumption of ordinary physical rules. Surface response to light appears familiar and unremarkable.
Small variations in placement often occur without being registered as change.
Shadows adjust gradually, reinforcing a sense of continuity.
Objects receive illumination in ways that align with their material properties.
The environment behaves within limits that feel reliable.
Subtle positional refinements rarely present themselves as events.
Diffuse light supports visual ease.
Brightness distributes itself in a way that feels appropriate for the time of day. Material textures become visible through consistent lighting.
Object posture appears variable without implying intent.
Contrast forms naturally where structure meets light. Air presence is inferred through subtle diffusion.
Surface contours become legible through restrained reflection.
Shadow length adjusts gradually with daylight progression.
Gradual illumination changes support continuity.
Orientation subtly influences how presence is registered. Edges lose definition under even illumination.
Light traces subtle paths across stable surfaces. Clarity increases as contrast becomes more defined.
Balanced lighting reduces visual effort.
Reflections shift gently with viewing conditions.
Spatial cues guide interpretation without effort. Nothing in the room suggests that anything is about to happen. Light continues to arrive from the window, yet its outcome suggests a direction that feels subtly incorrect.
The connection between objects and their effects feels marginally loosened.
Brightness appears to settle where it is not expected to concentrate.
Orientation changes begin to register as deliberate rather than incidental.
Shadow behavior becomes subtly inconsistent with prior observation.
Illumination appears to favor a side without an apparent source. Reflections shift position without announcing a reason. Distance no longer reliably predicts illumination. Surface signals duplicate without clear necessity.
Directional consistency weakens while remaining visually calm.
Light begins to organize itself into patterns that were not present before.
Object posture begins to feel intentional rather than incidental.
Depth cues begin to quietly invert. Familiar lighting gradients reverse without explanation. Correspondence between objects and their visual outcomes weakens.
Single sources begin to imply multiple outcomes. Spatial logic bends without fully collapsing.
Orientation shifts begin to feel increasingly deliberate.
Separation between form and surface diminishes.
Light begins to reference the object rather than its source.
Distance no longer predicts clarity.
Familiar lighting hierarchies lose priority. Alignment errors accumulate quietly over time.
Causal direction becomes uncertain.
The room continues to function, even as its logic becomes harder to follow. The relationship between objects and their effects begins to feel delayed rather than misplaced.
Visual responses continue after their apparent cause has passed.
The room appears to retain a previous moment alongside the present one.
Multiple temporal signals coexist without resolving into a single moment. Sequence becomes uncertain when cause and effect no longer agree on timing.
Expectation begins to arrive before observation does.
Visual information begins to repeat instead of updating. The moment feels present without feeling current. The room carries visual memory alongside perception.
More than one moment appears to occupy the same visual space.
Effects no longer conclude when their causes end.
Recognition arrives slightly after perception.
Time cues begin to disagree quietly. The present begins to feel slightly retrospective. Object and environment no longer feel simultaneous.
Change appears buffered rather than immediate.
The scene gives the impression of having already occurred.
Temporal reference points begin to slide.
Visual memory overlaps with current input.
The scene feels slightly behind itself.
Completion no longer follows change immediately.
The present stretches without advancing. The room behaves like a memory still forming.
The scene appears to wait for itself.
Time no longer asserts a single position within the room.
The room presents a configuration that feels already known, without indicating when it was last encountered.
Conditions resemble stability closely enough to reduce the impulse to question them. Visual cues reorganize into patterns that no longer invite comparison. Alignment restores itself without acknowledging prior deviation.
Balance returns quietly, without resolving what preceded it.
Light resumes behavior that aligns with expectation rather than explanation. Visual complexity reduces itself without signaling completion.
The environment stabilizes into a readable state.
Orientation settles into a position that discourages further interpretation. Cause and effect appear to reconnect without commentary. Eventually, spatial logic reasserts itself without reference to interruption. Continuity replaces variation without announcement. The room no longer implies progression or delay.
Nothing within the frame suggests a need for alteration.
The scene feels sufficient without asserting finality.
Stability persists without indicating duration.
The present moment loses distinction from others.
Temporal markers lose relevance when repetition feels exact.
Recognition replaces curiosity.
Nothing appears unresolved.
Nothing suggests a next moment.
The scene feels complete in a way that implies recurrence.
Observation no longer produces discovery. The environment offers closure without explanation.
The room appears ready to be observed again.